Welcome to our channel.
Chapter 1. A Whisper in Willowford. The village of Willowford was the kind of place one might expect to see on a postcard. Quaint cottages dusted with moss, cobblestone lanes winding past ivy-covered tea shops, and a soft breeze that always smelled faintly of lavender and loam. Jessica Fletcher had visited dozens of such places, but Willowford had an air of something quieter, almost watchful. She was there to give a lecture at the Willowford Literary Society's spring gathering, held annually at the town hall just off Honeysuckle Hill. But as the taxi slowed by the square, Jessica caught a glance between two women outside the bakery. One whispered something, the other pursed her lips, then both looked away when they saw her watching. Jessica stepped out of the cab, adjusted her shoulder bag, and smiled politely. She'd learned long ago that in small villages, secrets didn't stay hidden, but they certainly didn't introduce themselves either. "Mrs. Fletcher?" came a voice. A tall, thin man in his 60s, wearing a crisp blazer and a rather anxious expression, approached with outstretched hand. "I'm Harold Tibbins, president of the Literary Society. So pleased you could come." Jessica shook his hand warmly. "Delighted to be here. It's a lovely village." Harold gave a nervous chuckle. "Yes, well, most days it is. Shall I show you to your lodging?" She followed him through winding paths toward a charming bed and breakfast named the Lavender Nest. Along the way, she took note of the closed florist's shop, a shuttered antiques window, and a sombre black ribbon pinned to the town notice board. "You've had a loss recently?" Jessica asked gently. Harold hesitated. "Ah, yes, Mrs. Clarissa Rigby died 2 weeks ago in a fall, terrible accident. She lived alone up on Honeysuckle Hill." Jessica said nothing, but her mind filed the detail away. The name sounded familiar. Inside the B&B, she was greeted by the proprietor, Edith Carmichael, a robust woman with a gentle voice and sad eyes. "Clarissa was my cousin," Edith said once Harold had left. "Everyone loved her. It's been hard on the village." Jessica sat on the edge of her floral print bed and nodded sympathetically. "Did you grow up together?" "We did. She was older by a few years, but always had a kind word. After her husband passed, she kept to herself more. Still, everyone respected her. Kept the loveliest garden on Honeysuckle Hill. They say she slipped on the back stairs, broke her neck." Edith's voice faltered. "Funny thing is, she was terrified of those stairs, would never go down them unless she had to. And the night she died, the back gate was open. Strange, isn't it?" Jessica met Edith's gaze. "Very." Later that evening, Jessica walked the main lane, past neat rows of shops closed early, out of respect for the Rigby loss, or perhaps to avoid visitors asking too many questions. She paused near the churchyard, where a cluster of mourners passed, speaking in low tones. "She had a will, you know. Left everything to her gardener, can you imagine?" Jessica turned slightly. The speaker was a grey-haired man in overalls, speaking to another villager by the gate. She pretended to study a nearby plaque while listening. She had no family left. Still, to leave the whole estate to Thomas, the man barely knows what to do with a shovel. Jessica strolled on, her mind knitting together threads. A widow, known for being careful, falling down a staircase she rarely used, a suddenly wealthy gardener, whispers, closed shops, open gates. The next morning, she made her way to the hall for her lecture. The Literary Society event was well attended, though the mood remained subdued. After her talk, Harold invited her to a luncheon in the garden behind the town hall. Jessica was passing a stone bench when a woman approached, elegant in a faded wool coat and soft-spoken. "You're Mrs. Fletcher, aren't you? I'm Alice Trenton. I was Clarissa's housekeeper. We didn't always get along, but, well, I still light a candle for her each morning." Jessica tilted her head. I'm sorry for your loss. I understand it was quite a shock. Alice nodded. It was. She was due to see the solicitor the day after she died, you know. Something about updating her will, but she never made it. Jessica's brow furrowed. She hadn't yet signed the new version? I don't believe so, Alice said softly. But what puzzles me, the night before she asked me to stay later. She said she heard footsteps in the garden, but when I looked, there was no one. I told her it was probably foxes. She didn't believe me. Jessica's thoughts circled. And the next day, she fell? Yes, Alice whispered. Off the back stairs, the very ones she had locked since her husband's death. That night, Jessica sat by her window sipping chamomile tea. In the distance, the silhouette of Honeysuckle Hill loomed, dark against the pale moonlight. She could see the outline of the cottage, Clarissa Rigby's cottage, and just below it, the garden gate. A breeze rustled the trees. Something in this village wasn't adding up. Jessica had heard this tune before, a sudden death, an altered will, a shift in whispers. She made a note in her notebook. Backstairs rarely used gate open. Gardener inherits will update pending footsteps in garden. It was only the beginning, but Jessica Fletcher had learned to listen carefully when a village whispered, even when the whispers tried to lie. Chapter 2. The Garden with No Roses. The sun was barely up when Jessica Fletcher wrapped a light shawl over her shoulders and began the gentle climb toward Honeysuckle Hill. The path curved past mossy stone walls and tidy box hedges, the village still cloaked in that fragile morning hush. Birds chirped with faint urgency, and the breeze tugged at the edge of her scarf like a nervous child. She could feel it. Something was unsettled here. Clarissa Rigby's house came into view at the summit, its white-painted brickwork dulled by time and mist. The windows, once known for their flower boxes, stood bare. The gate to the side garden, reportedly left open the night of Clarissa's death, was now closed but not locked. Jessica reached for the latch, hesitated, then gently let herself through. The garden had clearly been something of pride, though now it bore the quiet chaos of neglect. Weeds were beginning to crowd the edges of the gravel paths. A wind chime clinked dully on the veranda. Most strikingly, the rose trellis, Clarissa's pride, as Edith had once told her, was completely bare. Jessica crouched to examine the soil near the base of the trellis, freshly disturbed earth. No tools nearby, though. "You won't find much blooming these days," the voice came from behind her. Jessica turned to see a man in his mid-30s leaning on a rake at the rear fence. His arms were strong, sleeves rolled up, with dirt under his nails and suspicion in his eyes. "Thomas Ridley?" she asked. He gave a nod but did not offer his hand. "I'm Jessica Fletcher. I was invited for the Literary Society, but Clarissa's death..." Well, I found myself curious. "She was a good woman," he said stiffly. "Paid me fair, let me get on with things. Now she's gone and everyone thinks I'm some kind of thief." "Because you inherited?" Jessica asked gently. Thomas's jaw tightened. "I didn't ask for a thing. She said once she had no kin and wouldn't let the council sell off her home. I didn't believe she'd actually leave it to me." Jessica studied his face. He didn't seem eager to impress her, or anyone. "You were here the day she died?" she asked. "Course I was. Mornings I checked the greenhouse, left around noon. She was in the sitting room reading, never went round back, never touched those stairs." Jessica nodded thoughtfully. "But they found her at the bottom of the back staircase?" "Yeah." "Which is strange, isn't it? She hated those stairs." Jessica stood. "The gate, was it open that day?" Thomas hesitated. "I thought so, but the wind can play tricks." As Jessica made her way down the hill, her thoughts returned to the empty trellis. No roses, yet someone had dug recently. Why? Later that morning, she visited Willowford's local church. The small office of Reverend Cole was lined with dusty hymnals and porcelain figurines. He was a slight man with thinning hair and watery eyes. Clarissa was devout, he said, pouring her tea. Never missed a service until the last few months. Kept to herself more. Any reason? Jessica asked. Rumours, he said hesitantly. About her late husband. Albert Rigby died 10 years ago. Heart attack, they said, but there was gossip. Jessica leaned forward. Gossip about what? That he was in debt. Some said he was being blackmailed. Others said he'd hidden something of value. Money, perhaps. It was all nonsense, of course. But Clarissa took it hard, became more private, gave more to the church. Do you recall anyone visiting her recently? Jessica pressed. Reverend Cole paused. A woman came, maybe a week before she passed, smartly dressed, didn't give her name. Clarissa looked frightened afterward, said it was nothing, but I saw her crying in the pew later. Jessica made another mental note. An unknown visitor, a frightened widow, and then a sudden, fatal fall. She left the church and strolled through the high street where the townspeople offered cautious nods. Outside the antiques shop, a man in tweed was adjusting a brass lantern in the window. He straightened as she approached. Morning, ma'am. Looking for anything in particular? Jessica offered a friendly smile. Just browsing. I'm Jessica Fletcher. He blinked. The writer. I am. You run the antiques shop. William Pratt. Been here 10 years. I sold Clarissa a music box once. Real fine piece. Did you know her well? Only in passing, reserved lady, though a few days before she passed, she brought in a silver frame. Wanted to know if it was worth anything. I told her not much. It was dented. She seemed disappointed. Jessica furrowed her brow. A photograph inside. Number, just the frame. But here's the odd thing. The back had been forced open, like someone had hidden something in it before. Jessica thanked him and walked on, her thoughts racing. The pieces were shifting. An empty rose garden with fresh soil, a missing photograph frame, a strange woman visitor, a rumoured hidden treasure or debt. Back at the B&B, Edith Carmichael was dusting the foyer. Did Clarissa have any close friends? Jessica asked. Not really, Edith said, though she used to write letters often, always posted them herself. Bit old-fashioned. Jessica's gaze landed on the writing desk near the stairs. Mind if I... Edith nodded. Jessica opened the top drawer. Inside, beneath a leather blotter, was a small stack of unused envelopes. One bore Clarissa's handwriting. To be opened only if I am gone. Jessica froze. Carefully, she opened it. Inside was a single line. They know about the ledger. The roses were never just for show. Chapter 3. Tea Leaves and Tensions. The Willowford tea room was a curious blend of charm and calculation. Lace curtains softened the sunlight, while the smell of chamomile and lemon sponge cake floated through the air like a hush waiting to settle. Jessica Fletcher sat at a round table near the window, sipping from a china cup painted with violets, trying to read more than just the tea leaves. Across from her, a young woman named Violet Hensley added too much sugar to her cup and tried not to fidget. Clarissa was kind to me, you know, she said quickly, even when others weren't. Jessica offered a reassuring nod. Violet was the receptionist at the town solicitor's office and had reached out earlier that morning, asking to speak with her in private. Now, as the clink of spoons and soft murmurs from nearby tables surrounded them, Violet leaned in. "There's something you should know," she said. "It's about Clarissa's will. There were two versions." Jessica's eyes narrowed. "Go on." "The first, dated 3 years ago, left everything to the Willowford Historical Trust, but the second, which she brought in to revise just weeks ago, named Thomas Ridley. We hadn't filed it yet. Mr. Bellamy, the solicitor, said she'd return to sign it officially. Jessica remembered the housekeeper's words. Clarissa never made it to the appointment. But she never returned. Violet shook her head. Then just before she died, Mr. Bellamy said to lock her file away, told me not to speak to anyone about it. Jessica frowned. Why? I don't know, but he looked shaken, said something about a phone call she received. After that, he was different. Nervous. On edge, the door chime rang behind them. Jessica turned to see Harold Tibbins, the Literary Society chair, enter with a tall woman in a smart burgundy coat. Their eyes swept the room. When they noticed Jessica, the woman's smile froze for half a second. "That's Marjorie Vane," Violet whispered. "She's not from around here. She's been sniffing around Clarissa's affairs, talking to townspeople, claimed she was with a historical foundation, but no one's ever heard of it." Jessica filed the name away as Marjorie and Harold took a table on the far side. Jessica glanced back at Violet. "Tell me more about this ledger people keep mentioning." Violet hesitated. It was part of the estate inventory, a small, hand-bound notebook, faded leather. Clarissa insisted it wasn't valuable, but she kept it locked in a drawer. Jessica tapped a finger to her teacup. "Do you know what was inside?" "No," Violet said, "but I heard Mr. Bellamy once say it would be worth a great deal to the wrong person. Whatever that means." Jessica stood. "It means someone may have had more than inheritance on their mind." Outside, the air had turned crisp. Jessica strolled to the edge of the green where the bakery owner, Mrs. Penfold, was putting out a sign for scones. She offered a polite nod, but her eyes didn't smile. "I heard you've been asking about Clarissa," Mrs. Penfold said without greeting. "Just trying to understand what happened," Jessica replied. "She seemed important to this town." "She was," Penfold said flatly. "Too important, maybe. When people know too much, it unsettles things." Jessica tilted her head. What did Clarissa know? The baker folded her arms. "Old debts, old sins. This village likes its history, neat, tidy, and buried under commemorative plaques." "Did she ever talk about her late husband?" Penfold's expression darkened. "Albert Rigby was no saint. He lost more money than he made, gambled with the wrong sort. Some say he was laundering something through those antique auctions. Clarissa stood by him anyway." Jessica thought back to the empty rose garden. "And when he died?" "Clarissa stopped hosting garden parties, stopped taking visitors. Some say she found something of his, something she didn't want found again." Jessica returned to the lavender nest to find a man waiting on the front step, tall, bespectacled, and dressed in tweed. He introduced himself crisply. "Graham Bellamy, you're Mrs. Fletcher." "I am." He gestured toward the garden. "May we talk?" They walked under the wisteria pergola as Bellamy adjusted his collar. "I'm Clarissa's solicitor. I understand you've been asking questions." Jessica gave him a patient smile. "Only because no one seems to be answering them." Bellamy sighed. "She came to me 3 weeks ago, frightened. Said someone had approached her about Albert's old dealings. She never named names, but she feared someone was after what she'd kept hidden." Jessica didn't speak. "I advised her to revise the will. She wanted to leave everything to Thomas and to donate a separate sum to the local school. But she missed the signing." "Because she died," Jessica said quietly. Bellamy nodded grimly. "The next day?" Jessica paused. "And the ledger?" His eyes sharpened. "It's missing. It was in her desk drawer. When the house was inventoried, it was gone." "Who had access?" Bellamy exhaled. "Only Clarissa." and whoever used that back garden gate. Jessica stared past him at the hills beyond. That evening, the town hall hosted a small exhibition: antique documents, wartime letters, ledgers from the village's founding. Jessica wandered among the displays until she saw a familiar face: Marjorie Vane. Jessica approached casually. "Interesting event." Marjorie smiled, brittle. "Yes, quite a collection of old secrets." "You're not really with the Historical Trust, are you?" Jessica asked softly. Marjorie didn't flinch. "And you're not just a writer." Jessica held her gaze. "Did you know Clarissa?" "No," Marjorie said coolly. "But I knew her husband. He owed people money. People who want repayment even after a decade. Clarissa had the only record of where it went. I came for that." Jessica's eyes narrowed. "And when she wouldn't give it up?" Marjorie stepped closer. "I didn't lay a finger on her. But if someone else got to her first, I wouldn't be surprised. That garden ledger, everyone wants it. You should ask yourself why it was buried under rose roots." Jessica went still. Beneath the trellis, the missing roses, the freshly turned soil. She had been standing over the key the entire time. Chapter 4. Secrets beneath the ivy rain came soft and steady the next morning, misting over Willowford like a veil of memory. Jessica Fletcher buttoned her mat coat and carried a small trowel borrowed from Edith's garden shed. She didn't mind getting her hands dirty. After all, she'd often found that the truth, like bulbs and bones, usually lay just under the surface. Honeysuckle Hill was empty this early. No gardeners, no curious neighbours. The silence was perfect. Clarissa Rigby's trellis stood before her, still bare, still unnatural. Roses didn't vanish without reason, and Jessica had seen enough fresh soil to trust her instinct. She kneeled, carefully parting the wet earth at the base. Inch by inch, she uncovered something solid, a sealed tin box, rusted at the corners but intact. It took effort to pry it open. Inside, nestled in faded blue velvet, lay a small, worn notebook. Jessica turned the first page. The handwriting was Clarissa's, neat, unsentimental. Ledger of antique transactions, Albert Rigby, 1981 to 1992. Beneath that, item after item was listed with dates, code numbers, values, and names. Jessica recognized some: Pratt, the antique dealer; Bellamy, the solicitor; even Harold Tibbins. And at the end, several cryptic entries with large sums and single initials: M.V. Marjorie Vane. Jessica closed the ledger, heart racing. It was no ordinary record. It was a blueprint of Willowford's secrets, and proof that Albert Rigby had been laundering money through his antique auctions for years. Clarissa must have discovered it after his death and hidden it, unsure who to trust, and someone had killed for it. Footsteps crunched nearby. Jessica quickly closed the box and tucked it into her coat. Thomas Ridley emerged from behind the fence, muddy boots and wary eyes. "You're back," he said quietly. "I found what Clarissa was hiding." He stared at her. "I think you're in danger," Jessica said. "Someone believes you know more than you do." Thomas looked away. "They already warned me." Jessica stepped forward. "Who?" He hesitated. "Yesterday morning, someone left a note on my door. No name, just 5 words. You didn't earn this place." Jessica's eyes narrowed. "And you told no one?" "Would they have listened?" Thomas said bitterly. "Half this village thinks I'm a thief." Jessica said gently, "Clarissa trusted you. She made you heir. That means something." Thomas glanced at the cottage. "I think she knew this day would come." Jessica touched the tin box in her coat pocket. She did, and she left behind more than roses. Back in the village, Jessica found herself in Harold Tibbins's study, an oak-panelled room lined with books on local history and literary classics, none of which had likely been touched in years. "I'm researching for a new mystery," she said, laying the unopened box on his desk. Curious about how antique fraud might work in a small village. Harold paled ever so slightly. "Purely hypothetical, of course," Jessica continued. "Say someone discovered their spouse had kept detailed records of illegal financial activity involving townsfolk. Let's say they decided to hide that ledger." She leaned forward. "What do you think would happen if the ledger surfaced?" Harold coughed. "Well, that depends. Some might worry about reputations, others perhaps criminal charges." Jessica nodded slowly. "I noticed your name in the council's auction committee reports. You were close to Albert Rigby, weren't you?" He stood abruptly. "If you'll excuse me." Jessica didn't stop him, but her point had been made. She left the box unopened, but Harold's reaction confirmed what she already knew. He was involved. Whether he'd killed Clarissa was another matter. At midday, she paid a visit to William Pratt at his antique shop. The bell jingled as she entered. "Mrs. Fletcher," he greeted, polishing a tarnished goblet. "Need something unusual?" "I might," she said. "You sold Albert Rigby several high-value pieces years ago. Some of those items were never logged with the village auction house. I wonder why." Pratt froze. "That was a long time ago." Jessica gave him a small smile. "I never said when the sales occurred." He cursed under his breath and turned away. Jessica continued. "You may not have killed Clarissa, but if you knew Albert was funneling money through fake sales, and you were complicit..." Pratt gripped the edge of the display case. "He said it was for the village, grants, restoration. It wasn't meant to go bad." "And when Clarissa found the truth?" "She confronted me a month ago," he said hoarsely. "Said she'd expose it. I begged her not to." Jessica's mind raced, and then Marjorie Vane arrived. Pratt's face darkened. That woman wanted more than exposure. She wanted the names, the money trail. Clarissa refused. "And someone ensured she couldn't talk," Jessica finished. Pratt looked down. "I didn't kill her, Mrs. Fletcher, but I didn't protect her either." That evening, Jessica stood at Clarissa's graveside. The willow tree swayed overhead, raindrops clinging to the tips like teardrops. The village was quiet again, but not silent. Not yet. She turned as Edith approached, carrying a folded shawl. "I thought you might be here," Edith said softly. "They say the gardener's moving out." Jessica nodded. "I think he needs a fresh start. Somewhere that doesn't come with whispers." Edith hesitated. "You found something, didn't you?" Jessica met her eyes. Clarissa was trying to make peace with the past, but someone else wanted to bury it. Edith looked toward the trees. "She once told me if anything ever happened to her, the ivy would know." Jessica turned toward the hill. The ivy. She hadn't looked beneath the ivy. Chapter 5. The Clockmaker's Lie. The next morning brought with it a rare burst of sunshine, streaming through the window panes of the lavender nest and casting long shadows over Jessica Fletcher's breakfast tray. She had barely touched her toast. Her thoughts were with the ivy, and what might lie beneath it. But first, there was a visit she couldn't postpone. One name in Clarissa's ledger kept tugging at her. R. Gable, Oak Hollow Clockworks. Jessica arrived at the edge of Willowford by late morning. Tucked between hedgerows and the murmur of an old water wheel stood Oak Hollow Clockworks, a tiny workshop choked with brass gears, ticking pendulums, and the rich, oily scent of history. A painted sign read, "Restoration by appointment only." She stepped inside. The man behind the counter looked up, a narrow-faced gentleman with pince-nez glasses and fingers stained with polish. "Mrs. Fletcher," he said, as if expecting her. "You must be Mr. Gable." "Roland, yes." He gestured to a creaky stool. "How can I help?" Jessica didn't sit. "Your name appears in a ledger kept by Clarissa Rigby." He blinked, then reached beneath the counter and produced a wrapped bundle. "I thought you might come. I received this anonymously, 2 days after Clarissa's death. The handwriting was hers, but the ink was smudged. It said, to be opened only in safety. I wasn't sure what to do with it." He unwrapped the cloth to reveal a small, ornate mantel clock, Edwardian, with brass filigree and no hands. Jessica leaned in. "It's beautiful, but broken?" He turned it around and popped open the rear casing. Inside, instead of gears, was a folded page. Jessica reached for it. Carefully, she unfolded the aged paper. It was a confession. "To whom it may concern, if this reaches you, then I am likely gone. My husband Albert used this village as a shell. He laundered money through fake auctions with false valuations recorded in this ledger. The names you will find there are real, though not all are guilty. I stayed silent for years out of fear and then out of guilt. But silence has become a betrayal I can no longer bear. I believe someone from those days wants it all buried. If anything happens to me, look to the trellis and then to the ivy. The last piece is hidden where Albert first swore to clean his soul." Jessica read it twice. The last line stuck like a thorn. Where Albert first swore to clean his soul. She turned to Gable. "Do you know what that means?" The old clockmaker hesitated. "Albert? He came to me once after a funeral. He was drunk, told me he'd paid for his sins, said he'd buried the worst of it beneath the old baptistry at St. Leonard's Chapel. That place has been closed for years." Jessica folded the confession. "Not anymore." St. Leonard's Chapel stood on a knoll just outside Willowford, surrounded by brambles and thyme. The stone was worn, its wooden doors barred and moss-covered, but a broken window at the rear let Jessica slip inside. Dust hung in the air like old breath. She moved slowly down the aisle toward the baptistry, where a sunken stone basin waited beneath a shattered stained glass window. Beneath it, a loose slab of flooring bore a hairline crack. Jessica knelt, pried her fingers under the edge, and pulled. The stone groaned but gave way. Inside the cavity was a tin tube, wrapped in oilcloth. She unsealed it. More pages, dozens of them, account statements, auction forgeries, names, amounts, and letters, implicating several figures in Willowford. Jessica recognized 3 names immediately, William Pratt, Harold Tibbins, and Graham Bellamy. But one stood out, M.V., £11,000 over 4 transfers. Signed Albert, Marjorie Vane. Jessica stared at the documents, breath caught. This was the smoking gun, proof of conspiracy, extortion, laundering. She sealed the tube, tucked it into her coat, and left through the back. By late afternoon, she sat once more in Edith's parlour, the evidence beside her on the table. "I should call the police," Jessica said, "but I need to be sure of one more thing first." Edith poured tea with a shaky hand. "What's that?" "Why Clarissa waited 10 years to act? Why now?" Edith bit her lip, because she thought the danger had passed, until she saw Marjorie Vane. Jessica turned slowly. "You knew?" Edith nodded. "Clarissa told me the day Marjorie arrived. She said, 'She's back, the one who was never meant to return.'" Jessica's eyes narrowed. "So Marjorie was part of this all along. She wasn't just investigating Albert, she worked with him." Edith's voice dropped. "Clarissa knew Marjorie had blackmailed Albert years ago to stay quiet. But when she came back under a false name, Clarissa panicked. She said if the ledger ever fell into the wrong hands, The village would tear itself apart. Jessica stood, shoulders stiffening. Then that's exactly what I must prevent. She confronted Marjorie that evening. They met, by Jessica's request, on the terrace of the inn where evening mist crept over the fields below. "I know who you are," Jessica said calmly. "You weren't a historian. You were Albert's fixer, and now you want to erase everything." Marjorie didn't blink. "You have no proof." Jessica held up the tin tube. "I have 10 years' worth of it, signed, dated, accounted for." Marjorie took a step forward. "You don't understand what this will do. These people are your neighbours." Jessica didn't flinch. "Clarissa Rigby died trying to stop this from happening again. I won't let her death be meaningless." Marjorie's face darkened. "Then I suggest you watch your step, Mrs. Fletcher. Some roots are better left buried." Jessica's voice was steady. "Not when they're strangling the truth." Chapter 6. Voices in the Fog. The fog rolled in just past dusk, swallowing the edges of Willowford with eerie deliberation. Street lamps flickered beneath the weight of the mist, casting halos in the damp air. Jessica Fletcher stood at her window in the lavender nest, watching as the world outside blurred into a canvas of silhouettes and hush. Something about it made her restless. She had delivered the evidence, both the ledger and Clarissa's confession, to Inspector Aldridge that afternoon. The young officer had handled them with wide-eyed care, his expression shifting from disbelief to quiet dread as he scanned the documents. "It names half the village council," he muttered. Jessica nodded. Clarissa was protecting the town from its own past. But someone wanted that past sealed and killed her for it. Aldridge had promised to begin quiet inquiries. "But no arrests, not yet," he'd cautioned. "We'll need more, something direct. If this Marjorie Vane is who you say she is, she won't run, she'll wait. Watch. Try to finish what she started." Now, hours later, the fog moved in like a curtain, and Jessica felt that Marjorie was still close, still watching. A soft knock startled her. She opened the door to find Thomas Ridley, hatless, breathless and damp from the mist. "I got a call," he said. "From a blocked number. They told me to meet them at the greenhouse, Clarissa's old one, midnight. Said if I wanted answers I should come alone." Jessica's heart sank. "And you're telling me because—" "I'm not stupid, Mrs. Fletcher. I know a trap when I smell one, but I also know you're not one to run from shadows." She gave him a small smile. "No, I suppose I'm not." By midnight, the fog was thicker than milk. Jessica and Thomas walked in silence toward Honeysuckle Hill, their footfalls muffled by damp earth. Clarissa's greenhouse lay just beyond the garden, its frame warped with age, panes yellowed, but still standing. Jessica reached for the latch on the creaking door. "Stay behind me," she whispered. The air inside was warm and stale. A single bulb buzzed overhead, casting their shadows against rows of forgotten orchids. Then from the far end, a voice. "You brought company. Tisk, tisk." Marjorie Vane stepped from behind a potting shelf, the gleam of something metallic in her hand. Just a torch, not a weapon. But Jessica saw the shape of a spade leaning against the bench beside her. "I assume you came to retrieve something?" Jessica asked calmly. Marjorie's smile was thin. "You gave the ledger to the police. I expected that. What I didn't expect was for you to find the baptistry records." Thomas stiffened. "I warned Clarissa," Marjorie went on. "Told her the past should stay dead. But she got sentimental, thought truth could heal. Truth only destroys, Jessica. Ask the town councillors you're so eager to protect." Jessica took a step closer. "You're not here just for the records. You think there's more, don't you? Something Clarissa never found." Marjorie's eyes flashed. "She hinted at it, a second ledger. Said Albert kept one for himself, hidden where no one would think to look. but I always find what I need." Thomas finally spoke. "Is that why you killed her?" Marjorie's expression twisted. "I didn't have to. She slipped. Lucky, really, but once she was gone, everything became easier." Jessica's stomach turned. "You watched her die and did nothing." "She made her choice," Marjorie replied coldly. "So have you." Before Jessica could react, Marjorie lunged for the spade, but Thomas moved faster, grabbing it by the handle and wrenching it away. "You're done," he said. Sirens echoed faintly in the fog. Jessica had left a note with Edith, just in case. Marjorie didn't resist as the constables arrived minutes later, led by Inspector Aldridge. She was handcuffed without ceremony. As they led her out into the mist, she turned back. "This village will devour itself, Mrs. Fletcher. You'll see." Later, back at the lavender nest, Jessica stood again at her window. The fog had lifted just slightly, revealing the tips of the trees on Honeysuckle Hill. The quiet was not so tense now, not so watching. Thomas sat across from her, a mug of tea untouched. "I don't know what happens next," he said. "You rebuild," Jessica replied. "Clarissa gave you this place for a reason. You're not part of the past. You're the first piece of its future." He looked down. "I wish I could thank her." Jessica smiled. "You just did." The next morning, the town began to stir with cautious awareness. Whispers shifted into full-throated conversations. Names were spoken aloud again. Secrets had broken the surface and couldn't be buried again. Jessica prepared to leave Willowford, but as she packed, Edith entered, holding a small envelope. "This arrived for you. No return address." Inside was a slip of paper, Clarissa's handwriting, faint but unmistakable. "If you're reading this, you found the truth, but there is still one more name, hidden where ivy meets iron. Not everyone repents, Jessica. Not everyone forgets." Jessica read it twice. The case wasn't over, not yet. Chapter 7. Motive in Bloom. Jessica Fletcher stood once more beneath the twisting ivy outside Clarissa Rigby's cottage. The morning sun cut long shadows across the wall, now dewy and still. Her eyes traced the vines upward until they reached the old wrought-iron gatepost, the one Clarissa had always kept, painted black, though lately it had begun to rust. Jessica touched the stone column. The ivy here was different, thicker, clinging more aggressively. She pulled it back gently and gasped. Embedded in the wall was a narrow iron drawer, nearly invisible beneath decades of overgrowth. It looked like a small postbox, flush with the stone. A faded bronze keyhole sat beneath a decorative flourish, a blooming rose with thorns. She turned slowly and saw Thomas approaching from the lane below, a canvas satchel over his shoulder. "You were right," she said. "Clarissa had one more secret." He stepped beside her as she tried the handle. It didn't budge. Jessica glanced at Thomas. "She always wore that rose-shaped pendant," he said. "I found it after she died, left in her jewelry box. I thought it was sentimental." Jessica's eyes lit. "Bring it." 15 minutes later, the pendant clicked into the lock like it belonged there. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was a final leather-bound volume, smaller than the first, with pages brittle to the touch. Jessica opened it carefully. It was Albert Rigby's private notebook. And this one was different. These weren't financial records. These were names, personal notes, observations, leveraged weaknesses. The first few pages were filled with council members' secrets, who owed whom, who cheated at auctions, who took bribes. Then came something colder. Bellamy fears exposure, Tibbins drinks, Vane wants control. But the final entry sent a chill down Jessica's spine. One day, someone will come asking questions. If I am gone, the others will scatter, but the one to watch is Pratt. He pretends to be small. He isn't. He's the one who started all of it. and he'll be the last to fall. Jessica stared at the name, William Pratt. She found him in his shop that afternoon, polishing an old barometer. The air inside smelled of lemon oil and dust. He looked up, surprised to see her. "I heard about Marjorie," he said, setting down his cloth. "Terrible business, but I suppose it's over now." Jessica stepped forward, holding the second ledger. "You were counting on it being over, weren't you, Mr. Pratt?" His smile faded. "What's that?" "Albert's private record," she said. "The last one, hidden behind Clarissa's gate. You're in it." He said nothing. "You helped Albert launder money," Jessica continued. "But you were more than a silent partner. You started the scheme. He followed your lead. Marjorie was your distraction. Bellamy handled the legal tricks. Tibbins approved the fake auctions. But you were always behind it." Pratt didn't blink. "That's conjecture." Jessica opened the ledger and placed it in front of him. "Albert thought you'd be the last man standing. He wasn't wrong." Pratt stared at the name written in fading ink. His own, over and over again. "I suppose you've shown this to the inspector?" "Not yet." He leaned against the counter, suddenly very still. "What do you want, Mrs. Fletcher?" "I want the truth. About Clarissa." He sighed. "She was meant to leave it alone. We thought she had. Then she started planting clues, giving things away. I told her to stop, but she threatened to go public." "You confronted her?" "I begged her," he said. "She said she would expose us all. So yes, I went up there that night." Jessica's heart sank. "She was on the veranda," he said, "reading. I didn't lay a hand on her, I swear, but I left angry. I slammed the gate. She must have gone out later, alone, saw something, or someone." Jessica stepped back. "You're lying." His jaw twitched. "You weren't the last one she saw. Someone else came after you." Pratt's face darkened. "And they made sure she wouldn't speak again." Jessica visited Inspector Aldridge at the station. "She was right," she said. "Not all of them repented. Not all forgot." She handed over the second ledger. "This proves Pratt's role in starting it all, but Clarissa's final note said there was still one name, one we hadn't looked at closely enough." Aldridge furrowed his brow. "Who?" Jessica pointed to an overlooked entry from the ledger. "EC, kept silent in exchange for £2,000 grant, 1989. "Edith Carmichael," Jessica said quietly. That night, Jessica returned to the lavender nest late. She entered quietly, her thoughts a storm. Edith was waiting for her in the sitting room. "I suppose you know now," she said softly. Jessica sat across from her. "You helped Clarissa, protected her, but years ago you were paid to stay quiet." Edith's voice cracked. "I didn't know what Albert was doing. Not at first. He offered a grant, said it was for restoring the inn. It came in an envelope. I accepted it, and then I couldn't say anything." Jessica nodded. "And when Clarissa began to speak, you feared it would come out." "I never meant her harm," Edith whispered. "She was my cousin." "But someone else did," Jessica said. "And now I think I know who." Chapter 8. Truth on Honeysuckle Hill. Willowford was silent again, but not peacefully so. There was a waiting in the air, as if the village held its breath. Jessica Fletcher walked the winding path up Honeysuckle Hill one final time, past dew-drenched hedgerows and silent stone cottages. In her hand was the second ledger, Albert Rigby's private book of sins. Behind her, Inspector Aldridge and two officers followed, boots crunching on gravel. She stopped at Clarissa's cottage gate and turned toward the group gathered there. Thomas Ridley, Edith Carmichael, William Pratt, tight-lipped and red-eyed, and most of the Willowford Council, each summoned by Jessica's quiet invitation. "I thank you for coming," Jessica said. "Clarissa Rigby died 2 weeks ago. officially ruled an accident. But what truly happened is something this village deserves to hear. She raised the leather-bound ledger. This book reveals decades of deceit. Albert Rigby laundered funds through antique auctions, aided by certain townspeople. Some were misled, others were complicit. She looked to Pratt. You were the originator. You recruited others. You kept the books clean until Clarissa found the first ledger and threatened to speak. Pratt didn't speak. His eyes flicked to Aldridge, then away. But you didn't kill her, Jessica continued, because Clarissa was still alive after you left that night. Someone else came later. She turned toward Edith. You feared exposure. You accepted Albert's hush money years ago. You wanted to believe it was just a grant. But when Clarissa began unraveling everything, you panicked. Edith looked shattered. I didn't mean she was family. You didn't harm her, Jessica said gently. You just kept quiet, again. But the person who returned that night didn't intend silence. Jessica paused. Marjorie Vane claimed she wasn't there when Clarissa fell, but she lied. She opened the small silver pendant Clarissa had once worn, the same pendant used to unlock the ivy drawer. Inside was a tiny recorder. Jessica pressed play. Why can't you let it go? Because it was wrong, Marjorie. Then I'm sorry. A gasp, a thud, the sound of something breaking. Jessica stopped the tape. She'd hidden it in her necklace. Somehow she had a feeling that conversation might be her last. Marjorie Vane, already in custody, would now face murder charges. Jessica turned back to the others. But Clarissa's death isn't just a crime, it's a reckoning. This village thrived while burying its rot under rose gardens and auction ledgers. It ends today. She handed the ledgers to Aldridge. Full confessions, witness statements, time for the law to speak. That afternoon, Jessica stood in Clarissa's garden. The trellis, still bare, cast a shadow across the grass where the roses once bloomed. She knelt and touched the earth, cool and silent, now free of secrets. Thomas stepped beside her, hands in his pockets. She trusted the wrong people, he said. No, Jessica said gently. She trusted one right person, you. And that saved her truth. He smiled faintly. What happens now? Jessica looked out over the hill. You plant new roses and tell their story. As she boarded the afternoon train out of Willowford, Jessica watched the village fade into the green quilt of countryside. She took out her notebook, flipped past pages of scrawled clues, motives, timings. At the back, she wrote, Clarissa Rigby, not just a widow, a witness, a woman who guarded the truth until the very end. She smiled faintly, closed the book, and turned her face to the sunlit window. Outside, the countryside bloomed with early spring, and behind her, Honeysuckle Hill stood tall,